Today, I would like to show you how I made this card using one of the newest stamp sets by Stampers Anonymous and Tim Holtz. The name of the stamp set I've used is Curiosity Shop, and that is some kind of a caption for this card and my process of making this card, because the images as well as the color combination is something that I usually don't use for making cards, but perhaps that is an idea for you as well, trying to use something that you normally won't use. So let's do this. Hi, this is Luisa Heinzel. Nice to see you here today. We are going to start with a blank sheet of watercolor cardstock and some frayed burlap distress spray stain. I've spritzed the spray stain directly to my paper here, and then I've added some water to let the ink fly? No. Fly is not the word. It's not flying, Louise. So that the ink can move around. And while I have done that, I have also dried this thing with my heat gun, and then I've spritzed a second and also a third layer of the spray to my background here. And I've made the experience that when you dry and then spritz water or more ink at the same time, the effects get way better than if you would do that, after each other. I've learned that from Tim, and this trick is really cool. You can get a really nice effect, and I like that way better than doing it the other way, So we need another piece of watercolor paper in the same size like the first one. And on this, I've stamped my typewriter here with some black ink. I've used the smooth side of the watercolor paper to get a really nice impression of the stamp. And here you can see me tearing the paper. I was a little afraid, but then I thought it's just white paper with a typewriter on it. If it goes wrong, then I can do it again. But I paid attention that I tear the paper towards myself so that on the piece that I want to have on my card, that there's this little white edge, which is really visible, this piece where the paper gets then really thin when you tear it. In this moment, you can't see it so well yet, but in a second, I will color the white paper with some watercolor pencil, and then this white edge comes out way better. I wanted to have some areas where the background can be seen through this, at the moment, white layer, so that it looks like someone wants to write a letter to someone else with this typewriter, but he or she is not sure what to write and has made different tries to write something, and then in the end he or she has found the solution. Perhaps you have seen it in the beginning of the video. The card says "love you," but first the person was trying to find the right words, what to write to the other person. So to make this top layer a little like old paper, like really worn paper, I wanted to give this layer a color, so I've used scorched timber watercolor pencil to do that. And as you can see, I've made a little line there where the paper is torn so that you can see this white torn edge really well, but that there's a little bit of darker color before this lighter brown area of the paper starts. That, in my eyes, makes it really interesting, and it gives it more depth somehow. Oh, what a word. That is difficult. So the rest of this area I've blended with relatively much water so that it gets really light, and I've also used a dry paper towel to lift some of the pigment from the watercolor pencil off. That way I could control really well how light this whole thing gets. First I thought I want to use the color old paper because, old paper makes paper look like old paper, but I was not so sure about the rest of the colors, meaning this red, that is, by the way, lumberjack plaid, what I'm going to use in a second. I was not so sure if I can manage that it looks really harmonious and not too wild, because I wanted to have something like, a weird monochromatic look for those elements which are going to become red in the end. I don't know if that makes sense. Yeah, anyway, the typewriter gets a little shadow here with some Scotch Timber watercolor pencil as well, so that it looks a little more dimensional. Even if this typewriter is really, really gorgeous and it has so many details, I wanted it to pop out a little bit because I don't want to color it. It will stay like black and white, but I wanted it to be, of course, the main star of this whole card. And then I have built a little background stamp. I've done that just by taking the quote stamps, which I included in the stamp set, and I've put them to this acrylic block so that they are really narrow, so that there's not too much space in between, so that it looks like a background stamp when I stamp this now. Of course, if you don't have this stamp set, you could also use another background stamp. Yeah, that is also no problem. But I really like that this font of the quotes looks like written from a typewriter or with a typewriter, and that makes this whole thing, of course, more cohesive and more harmonious. Then I've cut a black layer which is a little bit bigger than my brown layer here to give the card a backing and to get a connection between, you know, the black stamping and all the black elements. And then I've sewn around the bottom layer, and I've also sewn those areas of the top layer which make this illusion that the sewing goes around the whole card. And then I have taken some foam tape to let the pieces of the top layer be raised a little bit. And to be honest, that was a really like nerve-wracking moment because in the middle of the process of adding this foam tape, I realized that this is my last foam tape and I didn't have any more of this in the same thickness. And I was really like nearly freaking out because it was like, you know, I've used the little tiniest rests of this to make this work. But as you can see, all of the pieces are a little raised now. So make sure that you have enough foam tape. Or I also got another tip from one of you. You can also use corrugated cardboard instead of foam tape. I've never thought about that. I have to try that out. That is really, really cool. So thank you very much for that tip. Yeah, so let's go on with this little piece of paper here. The stamp set has this little rectangle stamp, which you can use to make the little paper, which goes then into the typewriter. Really helpful. I mean, you could think, well, it's a rectangle. I could cut that with my scissors, but in this case, you get a black frame, so it looks stamped, of course, even if you cut it out, and it has the right size. And for people like me who don't like to measure, that is really, really good. So thank you, Tim. And thank you, Stampers Anonymous, that this little element is included in the stamp set. I find that really, really helpful. And to make this little letter pop out a little bit more, I've destroyed the edges a little bit. I've just split the paper here and there, and I've torn it a little bit, so that it gets more dimension and that you can also feel that this is like, you know, little crumpled when you go over the card with your fingers. And to make that pop out even more, I've colored these destroyed areas with some Scotch Timber Distress watercolor pencil as well. And that makes it, of course, darker, older, and more interesting in my eyes. Then here I'm stamping some other elements from the stamp set, like the hat, the mustache, oh my goodness, that is a new word for me, the clovers, and please don't be confused that I have two hats and more of the other elements. I've done that because I was not so sure if I am able to do what I want to do. So if something would have went wrong, then I had, you know, another piece and, you know, like time-saving thing. So don't be confused if you don't see all of those elements that I've just stamped on the card later. So this little guy gets some lumberjack plaid distress ink, I've just put the ink to my media mat there, and then I have taken a water brush and applied the ink then to these little pieces, the clover, the mustache, and the head. I know you could color those like, with shading and that stuff, but I wanted a really, really solid red. I don't know why, but I thought that looks really interesting. I wanted to try that out. And that was like, in my head the whole time. But of course, if you don't like something like this solid color, then please feel free to add some lighter areas to make some shadows, or not shadows, to imitate light. Yeah, so if the areas are lighter, then it's light, not a shadow. You know what I mean. You could, of course, do that way more detailed than I have done it here. I thought that this top layer is a little bit too boring, so I have taken my little like background stamp again, and I've stamped the second and third generation of the stamp impression here and there, so that I get a really light grayish impression of that. And I think that makes a really, really big difference. That gives the background more interest, and yeah, it's like more harmonious somehow. Then I have glued all of the elements to my card after thinking about this arrangement with the clovers there on the bottom. I think that took me half an hour to decide that. And then here is a little accident. This is my lumberjack plaid distress paint, which had an accident while it was shipped to me from the shop where I bought it, but that doesn't matter. This red is just gorgeous, and I wanted to have some red splatters here and there to, make this card more alive and to give it more details, of course. And I think that looks really, really nice. With these splatters, I had the feeling now this whole thing is a whole thing, and it's finished. So I hope you like this card as well, and I'm hoping that we will see the next time. Have fun with your own cards and have a very great day. Bye bye.